page 24. So we've been discussing this and entertaining all kinds of parenthetic and tangential ideas, which are all germane to the subject at hand. The subject at hand, of course, is the biggest subject possible, most all-encompassing subject. That's the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah, namely the purpose of creation and the purpose for which we are here. So the subject addresses specifically the three events that occur on the same day throughout history, namely the giving of the Torah, the passing of Dovid Hamelech, and the passing of the Baal Shem Tov. Now we explained the three stages, therefore, that this speaks of. What this is conveying is that there are three stages in the evolution, the evolving effect, change that we must have on the world, culminating in God's presence revealed on earth. Right? That's the point of it all. God creates the world deliberately imperfect, fundamentally perfect in terms of nature, imperfect because it conceals him. So it's our task, and that's his desire, to make this world a home where he's revealed and share himself with us. So that's the whole purpose of creation, and every event that has occurred in creation, both micro and macro, ever since the dawn of creation. The truth is, even before actual creation, because there's a whole process, a divine process that precedes creation. All of it, without exception, is all for this one singular objective, and there is no other. So he explains here that there are three stages, basically, in the broadest sense. Three stages in the realization, the evolution, the realization of this purpose. We should just appreciate this. We come to the third stage, which is Hasidus, the Baal Shem Tov. We're saying stage one is the giving of the Torah. Stage two, let's backtrack a bit. Stage one, giving the Torah, which we explained at length. Stage two, which we're in the middle of, culminates with the life and hence the death, the passing, the culmination of Dovid Hamelech. And stage three is embodied in the teachings of Hasidus. So this is what we've been talking about for the last month, more, maybe 5 weeks, since 2 weeks before Shavuos probably. And we've explained all of this at great length. Now, just again, in the broadest of brush strokes, the three stages up, so you remember this as a template upon which to place all the many details that we are sharing, is the first stage is revelation from above to below. Second stage is elevation from below to above. And third stage is the fusion of the two. So that's the general template. So the giving of the Torah is revelation from above to below. That's the empowerment to be able to refine the world and elevate it. And then begins stage two, culminating with King David, as we're in the middle of explaining that the last few weeks. And the third stage is the fusion of these two movements, which Hasidus began and culminates in the Messianic era. The fusion of the two movements perfectly, seamlessly, from above to below and below to above. If you remember that, then you're not going to be lost in the myriads, but the many details that we're talking about here. I just wanted to point out here that the appreciation that we need to have learning this, and I keep on using the word evolution. That's kind of a taboo word in the Jewish world, obviously, because of the association with Darwinian evolution. But the truth is that everything in the world, that there is evolution spiritually, and moreover, in fact, the whole notion of Darwinian evolution, which is no longer popular, certainly not the way he formulated it. It's gone through radical changes as science evolves. But the whole idea of evolution is true. It's a corruption of a very deep truth, a very deep spiritual evolution, which is why it's such an attractive idea, because it does appeal to the part in our souls that does resonate the truth. Now, this is a revelation of Hasidus. Hasidus is this whole idea of evolution. We're talking spiritual evolution. was not articulated at all. It was a much simpler formula. Life was a very simple formula. You came down to the world to do mitzvahs, overcome the Yetzer Hara, and earn your place in the hereafter. Period. End of story. Then one day there will be the utopian world when we deserve it, worthy of it, or it can come if we are so terrible. God will have to save us from ourselves, and then the Messianic era will happen, and that's a new chapter. It's a very simple model, very simple, not complicated, and therefore there's not much discussion about it. So what were Jews learning for millennia before Chassidus? They're learning intricacies of Talmud and Halacha and Medrash, etc., all of the details of observance and explanations, etc. Nobody was dealing with the overarching purpose because it's, you can say it in one sentence. It's very simple. Pirkei Avos says that in a few places, black and white, you come here to do mitzvahs to do an olam haba. That's what it's all about. Nothing more to be said. But Chassidus came along and revealed that a whole new depth, that it isn't about simply earning olam haba. It's about a divine intent, God's need, which you talk about endlessly. This is a huge revolution. We spoke about it yesterday in Shul, and afterwards I was having a little discussion with people that you need to appreciate when we talk about these things, how revolutionary they are. And there's still resistance in the Torah world to this idea of God having a need and a purpose. It flies in the face of what one would assume of God being perfect, and it's not for God at all, it's for us. And as even recently, Rabbi Friedman Manas was speaking here and other places, he talks about this all the time, and there was a howl of protest. This was in the Moroccan community, in the Litvish community, etc. I have to speak again. We're chipping away at the resistance, and eventually it is penetrating. I should say more than eventually, it's happening rapidly for a number of reasons. But the resistance is still there and still to be overcome. The resistance is very legitimate. What do you mean God needs? It's all for us, and that's the end of the story. God's perfect. We do mitzvahs, we get rewarded. We sin, we get punished, and hopefully you do tshuva and you'll lessen your punishment or have no punishment. It's all for our benefit, and there are plenty of sources in Torah to support this, that express it explicitly. Chassidus doesn't dismiss these sources, just illuminates them fundamentally, putting them in context. So this idea of an evolution, that we are evolving towards refining the world mitzvah by mitzvah, elevating sparks, etc., the whole revolutionary understanding of everything really began with the Arizal. The Arizal that began this in revealing teachings of Kabbalah. All this is prophesied in the Zohar. This would happen before Moshe comes, and the generations before. The Zohar even pinpoints the time. We actually learned that text. We had a class on that. We learned it. You all had the translation of the Zohar, Parshas Lech, where we saw these dates and the wording, etc. It's fascinating. It all began with the Arizal, and then continued with the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic masters ever since. As we all know, practically speaking, the Sephardic world embraced these teachings rather organically, but the European Jewish world did not, and offered very stiff resistance, and sometimes much more than that. But eventually, the resistance is eroded and in the end transformed. We're in the process of that right now, in the last moments of Mashiach's coming, where the so-called Litvish world, the Yeshiva world, etc., is not only now tolerating Chabad, which is a huge thing, because we were not tolerated. You need to appreciate this. We don't want to speak disparagingly about other people. No, that's not the point here. The point is to show and appreciate where we are today. Just yesterday I was talking with the other day, talking with Nechama. She remembers as a child, and we would visit her cousins and the Vimy and go to Beis Yaakov, and they used to make fun of the Rebbe and the Babich. That was the conversation Shabbos afternoon at their Mesiba Shabbos, at their Shabbos gatherings. She was a little kid, and she was very uncomfortable. You know, Chabad was marginalized, as the Rebbe extremely so, and they made fun of it at best. That was already nice when you were just making fun. But it was much more serious than that. The Tanya could not be taught in the yeshivas. Chassidim were barred from attending. If you became a chassid, you were rejected from the yeshiva. I mean, this is serious stuff. It's been done for the longest time. Thank God this is not true today, largely. It almost does not exist. Doesn't exist, and the Rebbe's teachings and Chassidus have I'll say infiltrated because it went through the back door, but eventually did, has been embraced by all of Jewry, increasingly so. The notion of an neshama, divine providence, and all the things we're talking about now, these old revolutions, are now the language of everybody, and becoming increasingly so. But we need to appreciate that this idea of evolution, that there's a whole process evolving towards which we are partners with God in bringing about, perfecting the world. This is an insight of Kabbalah Chassidus. So it's all new, relatively speaking. So in this wonderful Sikha, we are learning details about this evolution. There are 3 stages. There's stage 1. I want to repeat again what I said before, sorry. That the Darwinian evolution, and every idea in science, there's some legitimacy to it. If people come up with these ideas, it's because they're true somewhere, somehow. There's corruption of them, need to be tweaked. But there is truth. So the notion of the world evolving is very true. It's not physically evolving, it's spiritually evolving. So we're explaining now the 3 stages in this evolution. Again, stage 1 is, fill in the blanks, folks. Stage 1 is, just in 2 words, where we said it before, Yeshua.
Revelation
from above to below. That's stage 1, the giving of the Torah. Mind you, before that, there's a whole preparatory stage. That's the forefathers, which we also spoke about and explained what they did and why that paved the way. And that was necessary and critical for the Torah to be given, and why it took 26 generations that to happen. We didn't explain why 26, but we did say it took time. That's stage 1. That happened with the giving of the Torah. Stage 2 is from below to above. That began the day the Torah was given, or the next day, actually that day. And that culminates, as it were, to some degree with King David. And then stage 3, the fusion of the two, which we'll get to the end, which Chassidus began. Again, that all began with the Arizal in the last generations before Mashiach comes. So now we're up to stage 2, which we began addressing already. And that is, yes, from below to above, as embodied in Dovid Hamelech, King David. So let's revisit it and add detail to what we had shared with earlier. So it's not a bad idea to take notes, friends, as we write, because just again, maybe next time, basic, you can review it later. Take basic notes of the basic ideas. So two things that mark the hallmark of King David's contribution, Dovid Hamelech. The 2 things are sovereignty, the whole notion of the monarchy. He was not the first king. So why do I say that he is the one that embodies monarchy? Because it wasn't we explained this. The first king was his father-in-law, King Saul. He was the first Jewish king. Moshe Rabeinu was also a king. By Yibishur Melech, and there was a king in Yeshurun, Jethro, referring to the Jewish people. It's a verse in the last part of the Torah. But nonetheless, only King David embodies the monarchy.
Because it's perpetual?
And it's perpetual, correct. And it's perpetual because he is from the tribe of Yehuda. Moshe Rabeinu was the tribe of Levi, and his father-in-law, the father-in-law of King David, King Saul, Shaul HaMelech, was the tribe of Binyamin. They were temporary kings, but true legitimate kings are from the tribe of Yehuda, eternal kings. And that goes back to, way back to Jacob, Yaakov, the very beginnings of our people, when he blesses his children before he dies, and Moshe Rabeinu reiterates and deepens and adds and expands to the blessings. And there, as each tribe is given its spiritual identity and role for the Jewish people, so Yehuda is the leader, hence his symbol is the lion, the symbol of leadership, and the temple. So there's 2 things. So King David, being from the tribe of Yehuda, once he became king, all legitimate kings are his descendants. There were other kings. There were 2 kingdoms parallel to each other for 2 centuries. The northern kingdom, they were kings, but not legitimate in the sense that their monarchy was eternal, and it shouldn't have happened either. It was a breakaway kingdom. So King David, so it's 2 things. Number 1, monarchy. And the second thing is, remember the second thing, unique to King David, that we attribute to him, his great contribution. Number 1, the monarchy. The Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash was built. He didn't actually build it. That's true. His son built it.
Funded it.
But he what?
I think he funded it through his wars. Right?
He funded it through his wars. He brought peace. He created the conditions possible to build the Beit HaMikdash. And it was built in his merit. And interestingly enough, the shape of, I mentioned a moment ago that the symbol of the tribe of Judah is the lion. The Beis HaMikdash, the main body of the Beis HaMikdash, was a whole complex, the temple. But the essence of it is called the Heichal, which means the sanctuary. It was the only, no, it wasn't the only, but this was, a lot of the temple complex was open-aired. But this was this was the heart of it, the heart. It had 3 chambers, an entrance hall, then the holy. As you progress further west, the Holy of Holies. The shape of it was like a lion, because the opening entrance hall was very wide, and the back was tapered like a lion. The mane is very wide, and his body then tapers to the back. The shape was like a lion, indicative of that this is the place of monarchy and kingship, and also King David. You follow? The lion.
I think there's also some illusion that, well, in actuality, the doors of the Beit
I mentioned that
HaMikdash
last week. That's right.
Open up until.
I told that story last week, that when King Solomon built the temple, the doors to that building would not open until he evoked in his prayer. There's a whole ceremony described at length in the Book of Kings, until he evoked the merit of his father, King David, and then they just opened. So God was saying that do not forget that this is all built thanks to King David. So these are the 2 things, monarchy and the Beit HaMikdash. What do we need to explain? How these 2 things express, what do we need to explain now?
The elevation.
The second stage, exactly, of the elevation from below to above. How are these embodied in these 2 properties, these 2 qualities unique to Dovid Hamelech, which we began to explain, right, over the last few weeks. We spoke at length about monarchy, remember? So the first thing about monarchy, about kingship is, you can help me here and fill in the blanks, the relationship between the king and the people.
The people have to acknowledge their king.
The people
install him as
right. It's not just acknowledge; they actually create.
They have to want him.
Which means they actually create the relationship. There is no king-subject relationship fundamentally if it's not created by the people. You cannot force it. If it's forced, it's not kingship, it's rulership or dictatorship. But kingship by nature, definition, halachically, malchusoi, as we say, with respect to God's kingship. Every night in our Ma'ariv service, malchusoi, berotzoi, kiblalem, they willingly accepted your kingship. It's got to come from below. So that's number 1. So that's already a very powerful connection. But here's the big question. All right, so they're accepting the king as king. We're talking about God and serving God from below to above. In other words, our overtures to God. Sinai is God to us, then begins us elevating the world. What's this got to do with the king? Right, so we're now devoted to the king. It's a nice parallel, but what does that have to do with the great evolution of life and the purpose of life at large. This is critical to the whole understanding.
He's our liaison to
Oh,
Hashem.
because the whole purpose of this relationship to the king is because of his utter humility. We spoke about this, right? The king, the Jewish leader, is the opposite of the way leadership exists everywhere else. Remember, we spoke about the pyramid versus the menorah model. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a beautiful teaching. The contrast. The king has to be utterly humble and selfless. Otherwise, he's no king. He has to resist and not want the leadership. As Moshe Rabeinu did, as King David did, as all true leaders. They do so because it has to be done. Not, God forbid, for any personal agenda. If there's any kind of personal agenda, he enjoys, power, leadership, control, then that disqualifies him. Of course, there are many kings who abused the monarchy. We speak of the way it should be. And King David embodies that utter humility. He considered himself but a worm and not even a man, as he says in Tehillim. Over and over again, his pathos and his humility is expressed in Tehillim. So he's the king because he's the one that can inspire and lift the people to a complete surrender to God. The conduit and the model. And he's a conduit because he doesn't get in the way.
No, he has that transparency.
That's transparency, exactly. The transparency is the humility. Precisely. So, as the people coronate him and surrender themselves to him, as it were, and everything he represents, which is what he is, so that represents, from below to above, man dedicating himself to God. That's number one. So King David embodies the second stage, or from below to above, in contrast to the first stage. Mount Sinai, God revealed himself and blew us all away, quite literally. It wasn't our surrender, it was imposed on us. God held the mountain over our heads. That's representative of a revelation that gave us no choice. Who could resist such a revelation? But King David's epoch is where godliness is not manifest this way. Not standing at Sinai, we're living in Israel, a natural world, politics, government, etc. And here the people are dedicating themselves to King David, appointing him as king, is because they're ready now for a complete surrender to Hashem. From below to above, or it's a climactic, it really, more appropriately, it represents a stage of perfection in this connection to God, coming from us through our choice, not manipulated, as it were, dictated by God, but coming from us. That is number one. And the second thing is the Beis Hamikdash. What's unique about the Beis Hamikdash? There was a temple before. How long did we have a temple? I don't mean the years, but just since when?
When we entered into...
I mean the Mishkan, even before that, from day one. The temple is this, the Mishkan. The Mishkan, the house in the desert right away, exactly after the Torah was given, we had a Mishkan. And then we had it in Shiloh, and then in Dov, and in Givon. The temple, the house of God, was around for 1,000 years, almost, before it was built by King Solomon. Less than that, but a long time. So what's unique about the Beis Hamikdash? What's unique about the Beis Hamikdash is that it did not happen with the way that the house of God existed up until that time. Something fundamentally changed. And what changed is that the physical locale of the Beis Hamikdash becomes holy and forever. That's not true of where the Mishkan stood. Where the Mishkan stood, for example, while it was there, God's presence was revealed. That's true. But when they dismantled it and moved it, what happened to the place where the Mishkan stood? It could have been there for 20 years or overnight. Nothing. Nothing. That place isn't sacred. Even Shiloh, where the Beis Hamikdash stood, it's of historical interest, but it's not sacred ground, not more than any other place in Israel. And likewise, Nov and Givon, other two places where it was, till it was built in Jerusalem. But in Yerushalayim, what?
I guess all the private altars that were made prior to any physical permanent.
Same thing. All the private altars had no permanent holiness. Why? Because all of them was like you made your mishkan or your altar, and a beam of light, divine light, was projected there from above to below. When your altar moved on, was dismantled, the light didn't project. That was still above from below. No change on the ground, quite literally. But the Beis Hamikdash is something radical. The Beis Hamikdash is built by man, and the physical ground till this day forever is holy. That's changed from below. That's not simply being a receptacle to light beaming from above. But that's inner light. That's an inner divinity that comes from below, that's changed from below, and that is, therefore, permanent. And he's the architect, and as you said, the facilitator. He's also the architect. King David of the Beis Hamikdash. And he achieved this because he battled the world. That's the whole point. He battled the world and overcame resistance, extracted the divine sparks, and made the world ready, elevating it to become a godly place. That's a huge battle. There's resistance. And he achieved that significantly, a significant stage in elevating the world itself. Where do we see this? Embodied in the Beis Hamikdash, a physical place that's now, its status changed forever and it's holy. Clear? Yeah. I wanted to add something as we were talking. Okay, come to me. So this is achieved by Dovid Hamelech. All right, so we understand the 2 points now. That's in summary. What are the 2 unique hallmarks of King David? 1, kingship. How does that reflect stage number 2?
Because he's the human. His utter humility helps us to connect with Hashem, love to
Right, but now add to that kingship, the whole notion of malchus. It's created by the people. The emphasis that it's created by, we want to bring out how it's man's overture to God. Sinai is God to man. This is man to God. Because this is a relationship that's created by man. And therefore, as you say, in its transparency, it reflects and expresses our relationship with God that we are initiating. Let's add this word now. Sinai, God initiates to us. Kingship, Malchus, is us initiating to God. Okay, it's a new stage. We added the detail, why it's King David and why therefore humility and why we need a king. But the general, just in one sentence answer is why Malchus? Because that's how it's created. It's from the people. And that's what we're talking about, stage 2. The people to God. Sinai is God to the people. And the second thing about King David, unique to him, the hallmark of his leadership, is Beit HaMikdash. And that's unique. Why? It's the first time that
it's a holy, the spot of that place is
the physical ground becomes holy. We've elevated the sparks, and we've made a physical locale holy that didn't exist before. And we did it. Man built it. David fought for it tooth and nail, sacrificed himself for it, and we built it. So this is all from below to above. It's all through battle, through war, overcoming resistance, revealing godliness, defeating those that oppose Hashem. That's all done by King David. What's the culmination? A physical place that is now being purified, elevated, and forever holy. Now what I was going to add. I'm running out of time here a little bit. We've given an example of these two movements several times. Maybe you can remember the two kinds of teacher. Two different classrooms. One that reflects stage one teacher, one model, and another teacher that reflects stage two. And you need both. There are really two stages in teaching, really. You remember the two models? We spoke about it last week or 2 weeks ago. So I'll refresh your memory. The first one is a teacher that the children sit there mesmerized, and he is an enchanting teacher. And they completely transfixed and they hang on to every word. And when the test comes, everybody submits a perfect paper, word for word, that the teacher said, because he made such an impression. Now, what model do you think that is?
First.
That's above to below. Now, the kids, it's wonderful, they got perfect marks, but it's not their language, right? They're just really repeating back and reflecting what the teacher said. Are they likely to remember that, years down the road? The subject matter? No, they'll remember he was a great teacher. They're not going to remember what he taught. But the second teacher, you tell me, very different style, what would he do? And I said, they're both legitimate, you need them, stage one. In grade one and grade two, all the grades, that's the way you got to teach. And it's a different subject. It's in every stage of teaching, both things are necessary. But what's the second kind of teacher, which we're trying to do now?
Engaging the students to learn.
Engaging them.
To come up with understanding.
Go do your research. Here's the guidance. And discover it yourself.
How you came to whatever conclusion you come to. What's the process?
Yeah, engaging them. They got to research. They got to discover it. Are the papers going to be perfect?
They'll be different, most likely from one another. No.
Not just different, you're correct, but will they be perfect? Will they've mastered the subject the way the teacher knows it and teaches it?
Mastered it, but maybe.
Not the way
teacher.
Not the way. Not clearly not. The first group, when they submit their papers, and you read it, it's like the teacher saying it. That's the subject matter. The teacher knows it, using his language and his. But this is a completely different language, each one on their level. But they took ownership. It's theirs. They're going to remember it. It's part of who they are. It now remains forever part. And the more they engage in the process, and the more difficulties they had in grasping it. When the teacher taught, there were no questions. He just made everything clear. Light, shining. No questions, no answers. It's all revealed. It's all beautiful. But the second group, the second teacher, understand the text and questions and research and arguments until they get to it. The more they engage, the more they're going to appreciate and understand it and becomes part of them permanently so. So these are the two models.
It's like the Talmud Bavli.
Exactly. We said, yeah, that's exactly the story told. Bavli versus Yerushalmi. The story of the kid that was...
Lights turned on in the room.
That's right.
You have the answers, the conclusions, but you don't know how those conclusions came to be. You don't have the process.
Yeah. So therefore it's superficial. It's necessary. Like I said now, in teaching you need both. You cannot come into the classroom, find out, here you go. It's got to be both. We're bringing out the virtue of both. So this and other models help us understand. Thank you. The two models, very good. Okay, to be continued, God willing. Next week, thanks for joining. Shavuot Tov, everybody. All the blessings.
Shavuot Tov. Thank you.
Thank you.
What up?
Yasher Koach, Rabbi, Shavuot Tov.
What up?
Bye, everyone.
Good news.
Amen.